All right, buckle up, everybody, because today on the deep dive, we're hitting that nostalgia button hard. We're diving deep into the world of retro games, those pixelated masterpieces we used to spend hours on. But here's the twist. We're not just reminiscing about blowing into cartridges, we're tackling the big question swirling around how we access those classics today: emulation. And to help us unpack all this, we're going deep with an article called "Is Emulation Wrong?" So get ready to explore the legal minefields, the moral dilemmas, and maybe even challenge a few of your own beliefs about how we preserve gaming history.
Yeah, this is definitely a topic that gets people fired up. Emulation touches on so many things, like what's legal, what's ethical, and how we think about video games and their place in our culture.
Absolutely. It's not just about the tech itself, but what that tech represents. And honestly, the article doesn't hold back. It dives right into the legal stuff, which, let's be honest, can get a little confusing.
Yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions floating around out there. People think just because a game is old, or maybe the company that made it doesn't even exist anymore, it's free reign. But the truth is, most of those retro games are still under copyright, even decades later. So if you're downloading a ROM, which is like a digital copy of that game, without permission, you could be breaking the law.
That always trips me up. Because what happens when a company, disappears? Or just forgets about a game completely? Do those games just vanish because of some legal technicality?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. There's this idea of fair use, right? Where you could argue that emulation is a way of preserving those games, saving them from being lost forever.
Like a digital museum of sorts.
Exactly. But legally, it's not a guaranteed win.
So even if you're trying to do the right thing, like protect a piece of gaming history, you could still get in trouble.
It's tricky.
It makes you wonder who really gets to decide what happens to those games in the end.
It does. And to make it even trickier, different companies have totally different views on emulation.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Some are super strict, like they'll come after anyone who even mentions ROMs.
Yeah.
But others are way more relaxed, especially for games they don't sell anymore.
It's weird how those company decisions almost influence how we see emulation. Like if a company is cool with it, releases its own old games, or even makes an emulator, it feels more legit, right? But when they're fighting against it, it throws this whole other shade on the thing.
It does. And that leads to a whole other layer of this discussion, which is the ethics of it all. Because even if something's technically legal, it doesn't mean it feels right.
Totally. It's like that internal struggle, weighing what might be harmful against what might be beneficial. And that's what the article does so well. It brings up that tension between preserving gaming history and potentially hurting the developers and the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's the heart of the debate. On the one hand, you have these incredibly rare games. Some of them only exist as a few physical copies, maybe locked away in some collector's basement or selling for crazy prices online. And it makes you wonder, should they be kept hidden away? Or should everyone have a chance to play them through emulation? It's almost a question of who owns history.
That's a great way to put it, because on the other side, there's the argument for official re-releases on modern consoles, right? That way, people who made the games get paid, and gamers have a legal and easy way to play.
Right.
But what happens if those re-releases never happen? Are those games just lost forever?
Exactly, and that brings up another really important point: accessibility. For a lot of people, buying a rare game for hundreds or thousands of dollars just isn't an option. But emulation opens up that world to everyone.
It's like democratizing gaming history. Everyone gets a chance, no matter their budget. It makes you think about how we value art and culture. Is it meant to be hoarded or shared?
Big questions.
Yeah.
So to all our listeners out there, where do you stand on this? Do you think preserving these games and making them accessible outweighs any potential harm? Or are there lines you just wouldn't cross? There's no easy answer. It's something we all have to figure out for ourselves.
It's crazy how the simple question, is emulation wrong, can lead to such a deep rabbit hole of legal and ethical stuff. But let's shift gears for a minute. Let's say you want to play some retro games. What's the best way to do it? Emulation or original hardware? The article kind of puts them head to head, and honestly, it's got me thinking.
Oh yeah, that's a debate that's been going on forever in the gaming world. I think both sides have some good points. Let's start with emulation. I mean, it's gotten so popular.
Yeah.
And for good reason. It's just so convenient, You can play thousands of games from all these different consoles, all in one device. You don't need to hunt down cartridges or worry about your old consoles breaking down.
Yeah, that's what always appealed to me about emulation. It's like having a giant library of games right there, a museum of gaming history. Plus, the article mentions that emulation can actually make the games better in some ways. things that weren't possible back in the day.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Save states, for example. Remember when you'd lose hours of progress because you forgot to save?
Oh man, don't remind me.
With emulation, you can save whenever you want. No more rage quitting.
That's a lifesaver for someone like me who isn't exactly a pro gamer. But what about the graphics? I remember playing those old games on a huge TV, and, well, they haven't aged so well.
That's where HD upscaling comes in. Emulators can make those pixelated graphics look way sharper and more colorful on modern screens. It's like seeing those games in a whole new light. Plus, there are mods that can improve the graphics even more.
It's like giving them a makeover.
Exactly.
But it's not all about looks, right? The article also talks about how emulation can help preserve these games.
Right, digital preservation is huge. Physical cartridges can get damaged or lost, but ROMs are like digital backups. They make sure those games don't disappear.
It's like a time capsule for gaming history. But then you have the original hardware folks. They have their reasons too, right?
Oh.
It's not just about clinging to the past.
Totally. For a lot of people, playing on original hardware is about authenticity. It's about holding the original controller, feeling the buttons, hearing the console whirring. It's an experience you can't fully recreate with emulation.
It's like the difference between listening to a vinyl record and a digital file.
Exactly.
There's something special about that analog feel.
Plus, there's the technical side. Some games are just really hard to emulate perfectly. They might need specific hardware quirks or chips. So even if an emulator can run the game, it might not play exactly right.
Like some tiny detail is off.
Yeah, like a sound effect might be slightly different.
Or the timing might feel weird.
Exactly.
And I've noticed online, this whole debate can get pretty nasty sometimes.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
There's this us versus them mentality.
Yeah, you have some purists who think emulation is ruining gaming, and then you have emulation fans who think the purists are just being snobs.
It's a shame, because at the end of the day, we all love these games.
That's true.
But it shows that this is about more than just tech specs. It's about how we connect with the past and what it means to be a gamer.
You got it. This debate gets to the core of what we value in gaming.
It's really interesting how deep this whole emulation thing goes, huh? We're talking about way more than just graphics and gameplay.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, how do we deal with nostalgia? How do we make sure everyone can experience these games? And how does technology change the way we play?
You hit it right on the head. I think it all boils down to this tension between wanting the original thing and being practical.
Right.
You know, for some gamers, those old cartridges, the actual hardware, it's almost sacred.
I get that.
It's like a time machine back to their childhood.
Yes.
Oh, tell me about it. I still have my Super Nintendo up in the attic. Every time I see it, brings back so many memories. But for other people, it's not so much about the object itself. It's about being able to actually play the games, making sure they don't just disappear.
Exactly. And I think age plays a role too, you know?
For sure.
Like the people who grew up blowing on cartridges, they might have a different view than people who grew up with downloads and streaming.
It makes you wonder, like, will kids today even get those old games? The pixelated graphics, the simple controls?
Who knows? You know, it reminds me of when I first discovered retro games. I was, I think, in college, and a friend showed me this emulator on his computer. We were playing Super Mario World, and I was hooked. I couldn't believe how fun those old games still were.
I love that. It shows you how timeless those games are. But let's get practical for a sec. We've talked a lot about the problems with emulation, but the article also mentions some solutions. Ways to make everyone happy.
Oh yeah, definitely. The best solution, if it's possible, is official re-releases. When a company ports an old game to a new system, everyone wins.
Totally. The creators get paid, and gamers can play the game legally.
Exactly.
But that doesn't always happen.
No, sir.
So what about those games that fall through the cracks?
Well, that's where the amazing gaming community comes in.
You know it.
You have all these talented people creating homebrew games and ROM hacks. They're taking those old games and adding new stuff.
Oh yeah, like new levels, characters, all kinds of things.
Exactly.
It's like they're keeping those games alive.
They are, and it's often done through emulation.
So it's like this cool mix of old and new.
It is. And then there are these new things called FPGA consoles.
FPGA consoles?
Yeah, like the Analog Pocket.
Oh, I've heard of that.
They try to perfectly recreate the original hardware. So it's like playing on the original console, but with modern features like HDMI and stuff.
Wow, that's really neat.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea.
So we've got all these options for playing retro games, but I guess it all comes back to that one question, doesn't it? Is emulation wrong?
Yeah, that's the big one.
And like we've been saying, there's no easy answer.
Legally, it's still kind of murky, especially when it comes to downloading ROMs.
Right. And ethically, it's up to each person to decide what they're comfortable with.
Exactly.
Some people see it as a way to preserve these games,
Yeah, to keep them from being forgotten.
and others think it's wrong to play them without supporting the creators.
It's a tough call.
But you know what? This whole conversation just shows how much retro games still matter.
I agree.
They get people talking, they inspire new creations, and they remind us of where gaming came from.
They do.
And whether you're all about original hardware or you love emulation, I think we can all agree that these games deserve to be remembered.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so great about this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
It makes us think about these important questions. And hopefully it'll help ensure that future generations can enjoy these games too.
Well said.
So to everyone listening, what do you think? What role will emulation play in the future of gaming? How can we make sure these games are preserved and accessible to everyone? These are big questions, and we want you to be a part of the conversation. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, happy gaming.